The neighborhood was tranquil, filled with the scent of fresh coffee and warm morning sun, until the piercing chirp of sirens shattered the calm. A man was slammed against his front door, handcuffed for nothing more than the crime of relaxing on his porch. The arrogant officer, making the arrest, had no inkling that he had just put cuffs on a sitting federal magistrate judge. Saturday mornings in the affluent neighborhood of Oakmont Estates were defined by a sacred, unspoken rhythm. It was a symphony of humming lawnmowers, the rhythmic tick-tick-tick of oscillating sprinklers, and the distant bark of golden retrievers. Elmwood Drive was a street where the houses were set back from the road, boasting manicured hedges, wraparound porches, and driveways filled with late-model luxury SUVs. Arthur Pendleton had lived at 412 Elmwood Drive for 12 years. At 62 years old, Arthur was a man who appreciated the quiet life when he could get it. He had spent his early career as a gritty, overworked public defender, transitioned to a sharp, uncompromising federal prosecutor, and for the last 10 years he had served as a federal magistrate judge for the United States District Court. His days were consumed by gavels, towering stacks of legal briefs, and the heavy burden of making decisions that altered the course of human lives. Therefore, his Saturdays were fiercely guarded. On this particular morning, Arthur wasn't wearing his judicial robes. He wasn't wearing a tailored Brooks Brothers suit. He was wearing a faded, deeply stained Georgetown University sweatshirt, a pair of grey sweatpants that had seen better decades, and scuffed gardening clogs. His hands were covered in a fine layer of dark topsoil. He had spent the last hour repotting a stubborn Boston fern that his wife, Sarah, insisted needed more sunlight. Arthur sat heavily into one of the white wicker rocking chairs on his expansive front porch. He picked up his mug of black coffee, took a slow sip, and let out a long, contented sigh. Then the peace was shattered. A white and blue city police cruiser turned onto Elmwood Drive, rolling slowly. Arthur barely paid it any mind. It wasn't unusual for patrols to loop through Oakmont, but the cruiser didn't keep rolling. It slowed to a crawl right in front of Arthur's property, its tires crunching slightly on the edge of the pristine driveway. Inside the cruiser were 2 officers. Behind the wheel was Officer Derek Chaffins, a 5-year veteran of the force whose personnel file was already thick with citizen complaints for excessive force and discourtesy, complaints he had narrowly dodged thanks to a fiercely protective union representative. In the passenger seat sat Officer Brian Miller, a rookie who was barely 6 months out of the academy, still harboring the naive belief that every situation could be de-escalated with a polite smile. Chaffins killed the engine. He stared through the windshield directly at Arthur. Arthur, sensing the gaze, simply raised his coffee mug in a polite, neighborly nod, then returned his attention to the morning newspaper resting on the small table beside him. The driver's side door swung open. Chaffins stepped out, adjusting his heavy utility belt, his hand resting casually but purposefully near the butt of his service weapon. He was a stocky man, tightly wound, with a buzzed haircut and an aggressive posture. "Hey, you!" Chaffins barked, his voice echoing loudly enough to cause Mrs. Higgins, the neighborhood busybody 3 houses down, to part her living room blinds. Arthur looked up, peering over the top of his reading glasses. "Can I help you, officer?" His voice was deep, resonant, and entirely calm. The voice of a man who commanded courtrooms on a daily basis. "Come down here to the sidewalk," Chaffins ordered, pointing a rigid finger at the concrete path. Arthur didn't move. He took another sip of his coffee. He knew the law. He knew the Constitution. He knew the exact boundaries of a consensual police encounter versus an investigative detention. "I'm quite comfortable right here on my porch," Arthur replied. "If you need to speak with me, you are welcome to step up to the walkway." Chaffins's jaw tightened. The disrespect. He hated when they talked back. He walked up the driveway, closing the distance, though he stopped at the bottom of the porch stairs. Rookie Miller scrambled out of the passenger side and jogged up behind his partner, looking nervous. "We got a call," Chaffins said, his tone dripping with inherent suspicion. "Report of a suspicious individual lurking around the properties on this street. Casing houses." Arthur couldn't help but let out a dry, rumbling chuckle. "Well, officer, I can assure you there is no one casing houses here. I imagine Barbara Higgins across the street saw me wrestling with my fern and let her imagination run wild again." "I didn't ask for a comedy routine," Chaffin snapped. "I need to see some identification." Arthur set his coffee mug down. The air shifted. The polite neighbor vanished, and the federal magistrate slowly emerged, though Chaffins was entirely too blind to see it. "Officer," Arthur began, his tone dropping an octave, becoming measured and precise. "Under what legal authority are you demanding my identification? Have you observed me committing a crime? Do you have reasonable, articulable suspicion that I am about to commit a crime?" Chaffins crossed his arms, puffing out his chest. "I have a call of a suspicious person matching your description. Black male, wearing dirty clothes, sitting on a porch. Now give me your ID before things get complicated for you." Being a black man in sweatpants on a Saturday morning in Oakmont is not a crime, Arthur stated plainly. And sitting on private property does not constitute reasonable suspicion. Therefore, under the Fourth Amendment, I am not obligated to provide you with my identification, nor am I obligated to continue this conversation. Arthur picked up his newspaper, gave it a sharp flick to straighten the pages, and began to read. It was the ultimate dismissal. Rookie Miller leaned in close to Chaffins. "Hey man," Miller whispered. "He's on his own porch. Maybe we should just run the plates on that Mercedes in the driveway and—" "Shut up, Miller," Chaffins hissed out of the corner of his mouth. Chaffins's ego was fragile, and it had just been shattered in front of his trainee. A suspect, because to Chaffins, Arthur was already a suspect, was ignoring a direct command. To make matters worse, the man was using lawyer words. Chaffins despised barracks lawyers. "Listen to me very carefully," Chaffins said, stepping up onto the first wooden stair of the porch. "You're going to hand me your ID right now, or I'm going to detain you for obstruction of an official investigation." Arthur lowered the paper. He looked at Chaffin's boots, currently resting on his property. "Officer, I'm going to give you one piece of advice. It is the best advice you will receive in your entire career. Turn around, get back in your cruiser, and drive away." It was the wrong thing to say to a man like Derek Chaffins. The porch seemed to shrink as Chaffins ascended the remaining 3 steps, aggressively closing the distance until he was towering over the seated older man. The air grew thick with a sudden, dangerous electricity. "Stand the hell up," Chaffins commanded, his hand unsnapping the retention strap on his taser holster. Arthur Pendleton did not rush. He did not scramble. He placed his newspaper on the table with deliberate care. Then Arthur stood. When he reached his full height, he was nearly 2 inches taller than Chaffins, with broad shoulders that had maintained their shape despite his age. He kept his hands entirely visible, resting loosely at his sides. He had seen enough body cam footage in his courtroom to know exactly how quickly furtive movements were used to justify lethal force. "You are trespassing on private property without a warrant, exigent circumstances, or probable cause, Arthur stated, his voice ringing with absolute clarity. You are violating department policy, and you are violating my civil rights. I strongly suggest you pause and think about what you are doing. You're detained, Chaffins barked. He lunged forward, grabbing Arthur's left wrist with brutal force. Arthur winced as the officer's thick fingers dug into his skin, violently twisting his arm behind his back. The pain was sudden and sharp, a stark contrast to the quiet morning. Chaffins used his other hand to shove Arthur face first against the heavy oak front door of the house. The thud of Arthur's chest hitting the wood echoed across the manicured lawns. "Stop resisting!" Chaffins yelled, a tactical phrase he yelled entirely out of habit, despite the fact that Arthur was entirely compliant, standing stock still against the door. "I am not resisting," Arthur replied, his voice muffled against the wood, though perfectly calm. "I am submitting to your unlawful show of authority." Click, clack. The cold, rigid steel of the handcuffs bit deeply into Arthur's left wrist. Chaffins wrenched Arthur's right arm back, forcing it to meet the left. Click, clack. The cuffs ratcheted tighter, pinching the nerves. At the bottom of the steps, Officer Miller stood frozen, his hand resting nervously on his radio. "Chaffins, are you sure about this?" Miller asked, his voice cracking slightly. "We didn't see him do anything." "He's obstructing!" Chaffins yelled back, patting Arthur down forcefully, aggressively slapping at the pockets of Arthur's sweatpants. "He refused a lawful order. He's probably trespassing himself. Look at how he's dressed, Miller. You think a guy who looks like this owns a $2 million house?" Before Arthur could respond, the front door, against which he was currently pressed, was suddenly yanked open from the inside. Arthur stumbled backward slightly into Chaffins. Standing in the foyer was Sarah Pendleton. She was dressed in an elegant silk robe, holding a watering can. She stared at the scene unfolding on her front porch. Her husband, a man who possessed the power to sign federal search warrants, handcuffed and being manhandled by a sweaty, red-faced patrolman. Sarah did not scream. She did not drop her watering can. After 35 years of marriage to Arthur, she possessed the same glacial, terrifying calm that he did. "Arthur," Sarah said, her eyes narrowing as she looked at Chaffins, "what exactly is happening on my porch?" "This officer has decided to place me under arrest for sitting in my rocking chair, dear," Arthur said over his shoulder. "Ma'am, step back inside," Chaffins ordered, pointing a finger at her. "This man is under arrest." Sarah looked from Chaffins to the nervous rookie at the bottom of the stairs, and then back to her husband. "Do you want me to call the precinct?" Arthur shook his head slightly, though it was difficult in his current position. "No, Sarah. Don't call the desk sergeant. Call Chief Reynolds. Use the cell phone number I have saved in my contacts. Tell him his officers are bringing me down to the central station and that he should meet us there. Oh, and please call Thomas over at the firm. Tell him I might need a ride." Chaffins let out a loud, mocking laugh. He grabbed the chain of the handcuffs, yanking Arthur towards the stairs. "Oh, you're going to call the chief of police? That's a good one, Grandpa. You do that. Tell the chief that Officer Chaffins says hello." "I will be sure to pass along your regards," Arthur said softly. Chaffins marched Arthur down the porch steps. The indignity of the moment was palpable. By now, the commotion had drawn an audience. Mrs. Higgins was standing at the edge of her driveway, clutching her pearls, literally. A neighbor walking a golden retriever had stopped on the sidewalk, pulling out a smartphone to record the interaction. Arthur kept his chin high. He didn't look at the ground. He looked straight ahead, memorizing every detail of the environment. He noted the exact time on his watch, the badge number emblazoned on Chaffins's chest, badge number 4882, the cruiser number painted on the fender, car 14, and the paralyzing inaction of Rookie Miller. "Watch your head," Chaffins said mockingly, practically shoving Arthur into the cramped, hard plastic back seat of the cruiser. Arthur awkwardly folded his tall frame into the vehicle, his shoulders screaming in pain as his body weight pressed against his handcuffed wrists. The heavy door slammed shut, trapping him in the stifling, sour-smelling confinement of the patrol car. The thick plexiglass divider separated him from the front seats. Outside the car, Miller looked panicked. "Derek, man, what if he actually knows the chief? Did you see the ring on his finger? That looked like a class ring from Harvard Law or something. And the lady inside? Are you kidding me, Miller?" Chaffins laughed, clapping the rookie hard on the shoulder. "Look at him. The guy is a squatter or a handyman who got caught snooping. They all talk a big game. I'm calling the mayor. I'm calling the chief." "It's a bluff. You gotta learn to see right through these people. We're taking him in for loitering, obstruction, and failure to identify." "We didn't even run his name," Miller protested weakly. "We'll run his fingerprints at Central," Chaffins said dismissively, getting into the driver's seat. "Let the booking system tell us who he is. I guarantee you he's got warrants." Miller reluctantly climbed into the passenger seat. He glanced back through the plexiglass. Arthur Pendleton wasn't raging. He wasn't kicking the windows. He was sitting perfectly still, looking at the two officers in the rearview mirror with a gaze so intensely sharp, so fundamentally unfazed that it sent a cold shiver straight down the rookie's spine. Chaffins put the cruiser in drive. "Next stop, Central Booking," he announced cheerfully, turning the steering wheel. "Let's see how much of a lawyer he is when he's sitting in a holding cell." In the back seat, Arthur simply closed his eyes and began mentally drafting the federal civil rights lawsuit, the departmental reprimand, and the absolute hellfire he was about to unleash on the municipal government. The ride to the station was only 15 minutes, but for Officer Derek Chaffins, it was the final 15 minutes of the life he knew. The ride to the Central District Precinct was silent, save for the rhythmic clicking of the cruiser's turn signal and the occasional crackle of the police radio. In the front seat, Officer Derek Chaffins drummed his fingers on the steering wheel, radiating a smug satisfaction. He had collared a belligerent suspect, asserted his dominance, and taught a lesson in compliance. In the passenger seat, Rookie Brian Miller stared out the window, his stomach churning with an inexplicable mounting dread. They pulled into the gated sally port of the precinct. The heavy metal doors rolled down behind them with a loud final clang. "End of the line, Grandpa," Chaffins announced, throwing the cruiser into park. He stepped out and opened the rear door, hauling Arthur Pendleton out by the chain of his handcuffs. Arthur's shoulders ached intensely. The steel had bitten into his wrists, leaving deep, angry red indentations in his skin. Yet his posture remained rigidly upright. He did not stumble. He did not complain. He let Chaffins guide him through the heavy double doors into the chaotic, fluorescent-lit purgatory of Central Booking. The booking area smelled of stale coffee, industrial floor wax, and the sour tang of nervous sweat. Several officers milled about, filling out paperwork. In a nearby holding cell, a drunk was loudly singing an off-key country song. Behind the towering, bulletproof glass of the intake desk sat Desk Sergeant Michael O'Malley. O'Malley was a 20-year veteran, a man who had seen everything and possessed a notoriously low threshold for nonsense. He was currently peering at a computer monitor, furiously typing an incident report with 2 fingers. "Hey, Sarge!" Chaffins called out loudly, puffing out his chest as he marched Arthur toward the desk. "Got a live one for you. John Doe. Refused to identify. nabbed him over in Oakmont Estates. Loitering, obstruction, resisting arrest. The whole 9 yards. Going to need to run his prints to figure out who he is. Sergeant O'Malley didn't immediately look up. Put him on the bench, Derek. I've got 3 domestic violence reports to file before I can even look at your John Doe. Come on, Sarge, this guy was a real piece of work, Chaffins boasted, nudging Arthur forward. Thought he could talk his way out of it. Used a lot of big lawyer words. Told me he was calling the chief. That caught O'Malley's attention. He stopped typing. He let out a weary sigh, pushed his reading glasses down his nose, and looked up through the scratched plexiglass at the suspect. The colour instantly drained from Sergeant O'Malley's face. His jaw went slack. The pen he had been idly spinning between his fingers dropped from his grasp, clattering loudly against the keyboard. The bored, cynical demeanour of a veteran desk sergeant vanished in a fraction of a second, replaced by a look of sheer, unadulterated terror. Judge Pendleton, O'Malley stammered, his voice cracking loudly in the suddenly quiet room. Chaffins frowned, looking back and forth between O'Malley and Arthur. Judge? What are you talking about, Mike? This guy is a vagrant who wandered into Oakmont. O'Malley shot out of his chair so fast it tipped backward and crashed onto the floor. He ignored it. He lunged toward the security door, separating the desk from the holding area, fumbling wildly with his access card. "Take those cuffs off him right now!" O'Malley bellowed, his voice echoing off the cinder-block walls. Every head in the booking area snapped toward the desk. The drunk in the holding cell stopped singing. "What? Sarge, he resisted?" "I said take the damn cuffs off him, Chaffins!" O'Malley roared, bursting through the security door. He practically sprinted toward them. "Do you have any idea who you just dragged in here? That is the Honorable Arthur Pendleton. He is a federal magistrate judge for the United States District Court, you absolute moron." Chaffins froze. The smug smirk melted off his face, replaced by a mask of profound confusion that rapidly morphed into cold, paralyzing panic. He looked at Arthur. He looked at the faded Georgetown sweatshirt. He looked at the dirty gardening clogs. I had a call about a suspicious person," Chaffins stammered, taking a step back, as if the handcuffs chaining Arthur's hands together were suddenly radioactive. Arthur stood perfectly still. He did not gloat. He did not smile. He simply looked at Sergeant O'Malley. "Sergeant," Arthur said, his voice as calm and resonant as it had been on his porch. "Officer Chaffin seems to be having difficulty operating his keys. Perhaps you could assist him?" "Yes, Your Honor." "Right away, Your Honor," O'Malley said, his hands shaking as he snatched the handcuff keys from Chaffin's duty belt. He stepped behind Arthur and quickly unratcheted the metal cuffs. Arthur brought his arms forward, wincing slightly as blood rushed back into his hands. He began to slowly, deliberately massage his wrists. Rookie Miller, who had been standing a few feet away, looked like he was going to vomit. He leaned against the cinder-block wall, clutching his stomach. He had known. His gut had told him something was wrong, and he had ignored it. "Judge Pendleton, I cannot apologize enough," O'Malley pleaded, looking entirely miserable. "I have no idea what these two were thinking. We'll get this sorted." "Sergeant," Arthur interrupted gently, raising a hand. "You did not put these on me. Do not apologize for actions you did not commit. However, I believe we are about to have company." Before O'Malley could respond, the heavy double doors of central booking violently burst open. Standing in the threshold was William Reynolds, the chief of police. He was still wearing his Saturday golf attire, a polo shirt and khakis, but there was absolutely nothing leisurely about his posture. His face was a mask of furious, barely contained rage. Flanking him was a tall, sharp-featured man in a perfectly tailored charcoal suit, clutching an expensive leather briefcase. This was Thomas Albright, managing partner at one of the city's most ruthless civil litigation firms, and Arthur's oldest friend. Chief Reynolds scanned the room. His eyes locked onto Arthur, and then drifted downward to the deep red gouges on the judge's wrists. Reynolds closed his eyes for a brief, agonizing second, exhaling a sharp breath through his nose. He marched across the booking floor. The entire precinct had gone dead silent. Even the air conditioning seemed to hum quieter. "Arthur," Chief Reynolds said, stopping a few feet away. "Are you injured?" "I will require some ice, William, and perhaps some ibuprofen. But my wrists are the least of your concerns right now," Arthur replied smoothly. Chief Reynolds turned slowly to face Officer Derek Chaffins. Chaffins looked like a man standing on the gallows, watching the executioner reach for the lever. "Chief, I can explain," Chaffins choked out, his voice trembling. "We got a suspicious person call. He refused to ID himself. He became combative." "Combative?" Thomas Albright interjected, stepping forward, his voice dripping with venom. "Are you suggesting that a 62-year-old federal judge assaulted you while watering his ferns, officer? Because if that is your official statement, I will ensure the FBI includes perjury when they arrive to investigate this deprivation of civil rights." "Silence," Chief Reynolds ordered, his voice dangerously low. He didn't take his eyes off Chaffins. "Officer Chaffins, you responded to a vague, uncorroborated call. You approached a citizen on his own private property. You demanded identification without reasonable, articulable suspicion of a crime. When he asserted his constitutional rights that he upholds in federal court daily, you assaulted him, unlawfully detained him, and dragged him here. Chief, he was wearing dirty sweatpants. He didn't look like he belonged there," Chaffins blurted out, desperation overriding his common sense. The silence that followed was suffocating. Arthur took a step forward. He did not raise his voice. He didn't need to. "Officer Chaffins," Arthur began, delivering a verbal dismantling that was sharper than any scalpel. "The Fourth Amendment of the United States Constitution does not contain an exemption for individuals wearing sweatpants. It does not allow you to suspend civil liberties because my gardening clothes offend your sensibilities. You operate under the illusion that a badge grants you supreme authority over the citizens you are sworn to protect. It does not. It makes you a servant of the law, a law you profoundly misunderstand." Chaffins swallowed hard, looking down at his boots. "You relied on racial profiling," Arthur continued relentlessly. "You saw a black man sitting on a porch in an affluent neighborhood, and your immediate, unshakable conclusion was that I was a criminal. You bypassed every protocol of de-escalation, discarded the concept of probable cause, and allowed your fragile ego to dictate your actions when I refused to bow to your unlawful commands." Arthur turned slightly, his gaze landing on rookie Brian Miller, who was trembling against the wall. "And you, Officer Miller," Arthur said. Miller flinched. "You knew it was wrong. I watched you hesitate. I watched you question him. But when the moment came to intervene, when you had a legal and moral duty to stop your partner from committing a federal crime, you stood paralyzed. Cowardice in a uniform is just as dangerous as malice." Miller hung his head, a tear escaping his eye. "I'm sorry, Your Honor. I'm so sorry." "Save your apologies for internal affairs," Thomas Albright snapped, opening his briefcase. "Chief Reynolds, I am formally advising you that Judge Pendleton's legal counsel is present. We are initiating a Section 1983 civil rights lawsuit against the city, the department, and Officer Chaffins personally. We will be stripping him of his qualified immunity. Furthermore, Judge Pendleton will be contacting the Department of Justice to request a federal consent decree regarding the systemic profiling and unconstitutional training practices of this precinct. Chief Reynolds looked sick. He knew exactly what this meant. Millions in settlement money, federal oversight, and a permanent stain on his career. "Officer Chaffins," Reynolds said, his voice utterly devoid of emotion, "hand Sergeant O'Malley your badge, your service weapon, and your radio. You are stripped of all police powers, effective immediately, pending termination." Chaffin's hands shook violently as he unclipped his radio. He fumbled with his holster, placing his firearm on the desk, followed by the heavy silver shield that had fed his arrogance for 5 years. He was no longer the apex predator of Elmwood Drive. He was unemployed, disgraced, and facing federal charges. "Officer Miller," Reynolds continued, "you are suspended without pay. Go home. Wait for a call from Internal Affairs." Chief Reynolds turned back to Arthur, his expression pleading. "Arthur, please, let me have my driver take you home. We will handle this." Arthur Pendleton adjusted the cuffs of his Georgetown sweatshirt, wincing slightly as the fabric brushed against his bruised wrists. "Thomas will drive me, William. I have a Boston Fern that still needs repotting, and after that I have a considerable amount of paperwork to begin." Arthur turned and walked toward the exit of Central Booking. He did not look back at the broken men he left in his wake. He pushed through those heavy double doors and walked out into the warm Saturday sunlight. The wheels of justice turned slowly, but as Officer Chaffins had just devastatingly learned, when they finally arrived, they crushed everything in their path. True justice isn't just about punishing the guilty. It's about holding those in power accountable when they abuse their authority. This story serves as a powerful reminder that our constitutional rights apply to everyone, regardless of what they wear, where they sit, or the color of their skin. Arrogance behind a badge can cost you everything. If you enjoyed this